Hello, I'm RJ with The People Have Spoken. Today is December 8th, 2021, and this is the News and Review. In this video, I'm going to be going through the articles that I posted on the People Have Spoken Facebook page and giving my thoughts and commentary about the articles and the bigger context behind them. If you aren't following the Facebook page, please be sure to do so. I'll post a link in the description below. Also, I just added a new t-shirt design on there, which I'll post a picture of it here. And if you are so inclined to buy that shirt or the hoodie version of it, then it really helps go and support the work I'm doing here. But with no further ado, let's jump into the articles. All right, so the first article that I have here is actually from the marijuanamoment.net. So this is not necessarily a local piece, but it is about the South Dakota. And the headline here is South Dakota voters disapprove of governor's handling of marijuana legalization. A statewide poll released on Tuesday showed that an average of 61% of voters strongly or somewhat approve of Noem's job performance across 5 categories in her first term. But just 39% said they approve of her handling of marijuana legalization, with 51% disapproving. Now, this story, in my opinion, is not so much about marijuana. So yesterday, in my news and review, I had mentioned that Kristi Noem and Steve Helgard, who's trying to take her seat, were having they're doing a lot of things that are just political posturing to try and win political points. And I wasn't really happy with the way either of them handled it. I think this is a big area where if Steve Helgard wanted to get an advantage, he could, I don't know what his background is on this, but he could go and really be pushing this point. I think there's a lot of people who weren't even really in favor of having legalized marijuana in the state of South Dakota, but were really upset with the way that Kristi Noem fought it, even after the voters voted for it in the elections with the ballot initiative that they had. And to a point where they fought it so hard that now they've struck it down, so the recreational use is gone, and now we're having to do this all over again. And it's another place where our politicians are very actively fighting the will of the people. I know even before this, I remember back in 2018, 2019, there's a lot of things with marijuana, and just the way Kristi Noem was approaching it. It was always like you see these stories on Kello about these big drug busts for these large quantities of marijuana, and most people are like, look, this isn't this big of a deal. This isn't what we're concerned about. Where it's much bigger issues. And I know she kind of addressed those issues a bit when she did the whole meth campaign, but that was its own whole debacle and a completely separate situation. And that's not even talking about things like hemp and things like CBD oil, things that don't have the THC that will get someone high, but she's still fighting very hard to limit the access to these. And I think this is one of the biggest areas. I think if she's going to be losing the election, this is probably going to be the biggest area that she's going to be losing on because of the way she's handled it. And I think it's a great spot where Steve Helgard, if he wanted to win, or if there's someone else who wants to go and run on the Democrat side, could really dig in here and really get an advantage by pointing out how she just deliberately tried to override the will of the people. But let's go on. So the next article, House Democrats denounce South Dakota over U.S. states as hubs for financial secrecy. Quote, the United States has become one of the most secretive jurisdictions in the world. Erica Hanakak, probably pronouncing it wrong, Government Affairs Director of the Nonpartisan Financial Accountability and Corporate Transparency Coalition, told lawmakers. This undesirable status harms average Americans, undermines national security, weakens democracy, erodes our tax base, as well as other countries around the world. Now, this is a really fascinating article, and I could go read through it and break down just paragraph after paragraph about this. So I don't have a very good grasp about the nuts and bolts about this, but basically from what I'm understanding, in South Dakota, we have a bunch of beneficial policies, particularly towards the way we have trusts and the amount of privacy that trusts are able to have and how people are able to go and I don't like the word hide money, but they're able to go and store assets in these trusts, and it's very difficult to link these, or impossible even. Again, I'm not an expert in how this all works, but it's beneficial enough for very rich people to do it that rich people do it. And where they put their money in these trusts here in South Dakota. And this has become the biggest industry in South Dakota, massively dwarfing the ag industry. Just it's not even comparable. And this is what gets to me about this is they will, in the article, they talk about illegal activity, how we don't know where this money's coming from, and all these things. And the reality is there might possibly be some of the money that is either used for illegal activity or was from illegal activity, and maybe that is a problem and we need to go and confiscate that money. But here's the issue I have is I would rather have 1,000 criminals and their illegal gotten goods be able to get away than have the government come in and take the money away from one innocent person. Now, if the government is able to find this and get it all figured out, that's fine. But what we've seen so many times is we have laws in almost every state that are called civil asset forfeiture laws. And this is something where when I talk to people about this and when people hear about what's actually happening, they don't believe it because it doesn't make sense. And it truly doesn't make sense. But in almost every state, and this includes South Dakota, but I couldn't find any stories about this being abused. But you will have it where a cop might pull someone over and they'll say something like, hey, I just need your driver's license, your registration, and your insurance card, and do you have any cash in the car? And the driver will say, oh, sure, yeah, $10,000 because I'm headed off to go and buy a car. And then the officer say, well, I need to confiscate that because I believe that it was involved in a crime. Now, the driver is not charged for crime. The driver's allowed to go free. But what happens is that money is then taken from the driver, and it's taken under what's, again, called civil asset forfeiture, where now the charges are actually going against the $10,000 in this case. And you'll actually see trials. I've seen them myself. They'll see trials. They'll say something like the state of South Dakota v. $10,000. And the reality is property, that $10,000, doesn't have the same rights that a person does. It doesn't have the right of innocent until proven guilty. So the person who is driving the car now needs to go and prove that the $10,000 wasn't used in a crime. And again, it doesn't need to be something that was used in a crime previously. It also means that it wasn't intended to be used in a crime. And it doesn't matter if you can say, well, here's my bank slip, because maybe you got the money from a crime previously and then you add it into your bank. Maybe it's a case where you are structuring your transactions so that way you're trying to hide the amount of money you're moving. They can come up with any excuse they want. And then even to get this further, what they can do is give the money over to the DEA. So now it's going into the federal hands. And this is part of a workforce agreement between the DEA and local law enforcement across the country. And I cannot remember the exact numbers. I think it's basically that way, give it over to the DEA will then rebate them back 80%, I should say, 80% of the amount that they give over to the DEA. And the DEA will use the entire force of the federal government and all the resources they have to be able to go and fight it. Now, the challenge is for something like $10,000, it will cost significantly more money to hire a lawyer to actually fight to get that $10,000 back than it would, so it's not even worthwhile getting it. This is literally highway robbery. They're literally just taking the money because they have a gun and they have the force and they're technically allowed to do it, and it's been held up in courts, and it doesn't make sense. Now, I know this is a bit of a tangent from the trust, but my point here is here we have lawmakers, again, trying to go and change the laws and change the way the regulations work in order to be able to see more of where people's money is. And the only reason they want to do this, there's one reason they want to do it. They want to do it so that way they can take the money. Now, yes, in the whole idea behind the civil asset forfeiture laws is they're saying that they're taking it from criminals. But there's countless and countless examples, more so than probably the actual situations of criminals. There's countless examples of law enforcement agents taking money from completely innocent people, and those people who are taking it from, those victims, have no way of being able to recover their lost goods, their lost property. And if this is a case where in South Dakota we start changing the regulatory laws, that will happen in South Dakota. That there will be innocent people who are using the trust in a very legal, upfront way, and we have no business getting in that, and they're going to start having their money taken. And even if it's not about taking their money for the purposes of saying, well, oh shoot, we made a mistake, we thought you were doing illegal activity and you weren't, then it's a matter of just trying to get more tax money. They've already talked about introducing a wealth tax, which would be where you have to pay a percentage portion of the amount of wealth you have. And this is, again, something that is just going to be stripping the wealth of Americans across the board. And it'll be taking money as a way of saying, oh, look, we have all this money in these trusts that we can go and take with a wealth tax or find some way to tax it. It's about taking the money from people and putting it into federal government. And I would really rather the money stay with whoever it is and whoever it belongs to. And because, frankly, the federal government is crooks too. And so if it's just a matter of it going from one criminal to another criminal in the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, it's going from an innocent person into just another criminal organization. And so I don't think there should be any change to the regulations. The more secrecy that we have on the way financial activities work, the better. Again, I prefer if it benefited more of the normal person, the common day, everyday Joe like myself, instead of just big billionaires. But again, if we start going and making exceptions for the billionaires, it trickles down, and we'll have these laws hurting normal Americans as well, because the billionaires have the money and the resources to go and fight this, and normal Americans don't. So don't buy into this whole thing. I've seen a lot of articles trying to villainize the South Dakota trusts. It's something they're really trying to go after. Don't fall into this narrative. The trusts are good. Yes, they're big places where big billionaires and very rich people are able to store money, and that's not a bad thing. Don't fall into the narrative that we need to go and start opening up this treasure chest, so to speak, for the federal government, all these trusts and releasing all this information, because it's just a way for the federal government to go and start taking people's money, and that does not end well. And in the last article I have here, and this is again an opinion piece, this is why I'm a South Dakota Democrat. I'm a Democrat because I believe in South Dakota where everyone feels welcome. Throughout my legal career, I have worked to advance gender and racial equity and led efforts to improve tribal relations. I believe in a South Dakota where our government treats individuals equally and respects their civil rights, no matter their race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or gender. Now, you may be wondering, why am I reading this article? And what I found this piece, and I believe he's one of part of our state legislature. Hey, it's Future RJ here, just jumping in because I was just editing the video, and I noticed I made a really big mistake here, and I didn't fully read the article as well as I should have the first time around. So this is Randy Saylor. He's actually the head of the chair of the South Dakota Democratic Party. So later on, I mentioned that I'm not going to give him the benefit of the doubt, and clearly that was correct of me. I shouldn't have given him the benefit of the doubt for what I'm about to say about this. However, I think I also missed a really big point here, because Randy Saylor also used to be, he's a former U.S. attorney for the state of South Dakota. And this is a really big indication of just how deeply we are seeing some of these very woke people ending up in very important positions, even within our judicial system. And I think this is a really very concerning thing that people should be more aware of. We've seen a lot of issues recently with the Rittenhouse trial and how we had a very woke prosecutor in that. And we've seen a lot of judges recently who are making some very woke opinions or are not willing to stand up against woke prosecutors. These are prosecutors who are being funded by George Soros and are put in positions, like we see this a lot of times in places like Seattle, This was a big issue there, and in San Francisco, I believe, places where they're basically just saying we're not going to be prosecuting crimes anymore. Now, I'm not saying that he was supported by George Soros, but again, for someone to have these woke ideas, even here in South Dakota, who is a prosecutor for the United States, this is something that should be a lot more concerning, and I think this is the bigger issue here than what I'm about to say. What I found really interesting here is the fact that as I go through, I agree with the sentiment with much of what he says, especially the beginning, where he starts talking about he wants a better America, and I disagree probably with the way we achieve this, but it seemed like it was more of a case that he had good intentions, and the way he's going about it was just not the best way. However, when I found and read the word, there's one word here that in this piece that says it's equity, racial equity. Now, I am all for equality, where people have equal rights. I have no problem with people having equal rights. But that is not what equity is. What equity is where we need to have equal outcomes. And so if I end up making more money as a straight white male, and there's other people who are they're never race, never sexual orientation. Maybe it's a woman. So let's say a black lesbian woman. Then that, and she's making less money than me, then that needs to be corrected. Now, there's two ways, of course, to correct that. One is to go and help the black lesbian to be able to go and make more money and earn more money. The other way is to go and hurt me so I make less money. And my wife, she was born into a communist country, and she lived in a communist country. She lived in the USSR, and she knows a lot about how communism works. And the way that they always focus on things is that it's about a race to the bottom. Everyone has to be the person who's the most victimized. Everyone has to be the person who is the least able to do work, because if you show any amount of ability to do something, then people will try and take it from you. It's always that you have to be the weakest, the most person in need. She was telling me about the situation about this woman in an apartment complex that didn't close the window in the winter because it wasn't her job, and that she was too helpless to be able to do this. Not literally helpless, she just refused to do it. And she ended up freezing to death because this was in Russia, where it gets extremely cold in the winter, which we all know about. And so what I find so fascinating is there's so much that I would agree with him, and I'd love to sit down and talk with him and really work through some of these ideas. And maybe this is something where he's just following in these talking points that he's hearing other Democrats talk about and doesn't know the bigger implication here. But again, I'm not giving people the benefit of the doubt. I'm sure this is actually what he means. It's words like this that we really have to keep an eye out for. There are so many things when we start hearing about diversity and equity. Again, I'm all for equal rights for people, but when we're talking about diversity and equity, what that means is that it is people, diversity is that it's non-white people. So I'm excluded from that. And we're talking about equity. It's not about equality. It's about equal outcomes. And the best way to have equal outcomes is for nobody to have anything. Then it's equal. And so these are very big indications of the woke dogma, which is, again, part of communism. So, and this is happening here, again, in South Dakota. This isn't something that's excluded into Chicago, into LA, into New York. It is here in South Dakota, and we need to be vigilant about it, and we need to be fighting for it. And this is part of the reason why I made this new shirt, which says, "D heard, be heard." The idea here is that it's not just enough to leave the woke mob. It's not just enough to stop following the sheep and following CNN and to go out and say, I'm going to be an independent person and I'm going to be seeking liberty. What we need people who are speaking out, people who are actually talking. This is something that really shocked me when I went out to Pierre, is that it is very hard for me to find men who are willing to go and talk on camera. I can find a decent number of women. In fact, when I was in Pierre, there was only one man who was willing to actually talk on camera everyone else was women. Again, nothing bad about women talking. I would just love to be able to see more men standing up and actually talking and speaking out. And this is the whole aspect. You may have dehearded, but now you need to be heard. So speak out, let your voice be heard. This is the people have spoken, because it's all about speaking out and making sure that your legislators know what you want, and that the people who are next door to you, who may have the same ideas, you can then connect on those ideas because someone dared to speak out. We're not having that anymore. And it's really important right now, more so than ever. Well, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please follow me on Facebook and or Rumble. And if you like this video, please like it. Subscribe to the channel if you're on YouTube and you don't want to go over to any of those other platforms. And again, please be sure to check out my shop on Facebook, or I'll have it linked down below if you're on YouTube or Rumble. So that way you can see some of the t-shirts I have. I have more coming on the way. And if you buy any of that merchandise, it really does help me to continue this channel. Thank you so much. I'll see you again soon.